What time is it? It's nation time.
Greetings and welcome to the AfterWords program. My name is Baba Kapense Chike, your host. I'm joined today by Cardinal and Bayou Chewy, the presenter of this week's sermon, Time to Go Hard in the Paint. Welcome to the AfterWords program, Cardinal Chewy. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Time to go hard in the paint. Your scripture comes from the book of Acts 13, chapters 20, verses 21 through 22. Some of our viewers watching this may consider the title or analogy of going hard in the paint as a bit of a cliche for a sermon. How would you respond to the viewers that may be thinking this?
That it was intentional. People are familiar with the cliche, so they know exactly what the reference is.
Okay.
Most people, I won't say people, I'll say sports fans, people who love basketball.
And I
If
think
you're a basketball fan, you probably have no clue what going hard in the paint means.
I heard it for years, and it took me a long time. It was a long time before I really got it. But you explained that God chose David because of what was in his heart, and that David had a heart of the people. David had a heart for the group. David had a heart for us. How does this idea fit with the concept? How does the idea fit with the concept typically taught in the traditional Western church, which places more emphasis on one's individual's needs and one's individual desires?
Well, scripture aptly states, man looks at appearances, God looks at the heart. So God is concerned about what's on the inside, not what's on the outside. And that's why God chose David, because he had a heart for the people. So having a heart for the people means you're not focused on yourself. You focus on service. How can you give? What do you have to offer? How can you use the gifts and talents and abilities you've been blessed to have in the service of other people? Because your gifts are not for you, they're for others.
But would you say that's a little different than what's typically taught in the traditional church?
Absolutely. The traditional church reinforces individualism, individualistic salvation. I'm saved just on my own merit. It's got nothing to do with the group, even though God didn't put you on the earth all by yourself. And you are absolutely not the center of the universe. Yeah. Your identity is shaped, formed, and fashioned out of your relationship to a group of people. We're not Black by accident. God made us a group.
Could you please explain or say a little more about the white myth of Black inferiority? Explain what the white myth of Black inferiority is and how its acceptance fragments and disconnects us from our limitless ingenuity, dignity, strength, and power.
So a myth is just a metaphorical story, right? It's a story that's told to reinforce certain ideas, worldview, value system, way of looking at the world. And when African people were stolen in mass and brought to the islands, brought to South America, brought to North America, the world had to deal with the injustice that was going on in this so-called Atlantic triangular trade, right? And so in order to justify their behavior in the eyes of the world, Europeans had to create a story. And that story said that African people were primitive, African people were backwards, African people were less than human. And that story was not only told as a standalone story, but they wove that story into their interpretation of religion, science, medicine. They did in every way they could. They tried to reinforce this idea that somehow enslaving African people is justifiable because they're less than us. So the myth of Black inferiority is that idea that we are less than Europeans, and not just us, but all people of color are less than Europeans. So that idea, that mythological false tale, is woven into everything. It's woven into the educational system. It's woven into the religious system. It's woven into the economic system, the political system, you name it.
So is it safe to say that we've internalized this myth?
We have absolutely internalized it because it has been reinforced and perpetuated on so many different levels, and it's been enculturated, right? It's a part of the culture. So there's no way for us to escape the mythology that follows African people everywhere we go, everywhere in the world. Just think about what people think about Africa. That's the myth of Black inferiority. We think Africa is backwards, primitive. Modern people in 2024 think Africans are running around in jungles with bones in their nose. That's how powerful a myth is.
And so how does this myth maybe impede or block us from operating from based on what's in our hearts? For example, the way you say David does, or the reason why David was chosen by God.
Well, if you believe you're less than everybody else, then everything you do is going to be impacted by that negative belief system, right? So in your best effort, it's going to be less than what it ought to be because of how you feel about yourself and the impact you have, your ability to make a difference in the lives of other people and the world. All that's going to be impacted by this negative belief.
And this impacts our relationship with God.
Absolutely, because God didn't create anything inferior. If you read the mythology of Genesis, it says everything was created and God said it was all good. Plants, animals, birds, the universe, humans, everything in it, good.
In the closing of the sermon, you challenge or invoke the viewer or listener to go hard in the paint, and you provide examples. Would you say this quest to go hard in the paint is as much a external endeavor as an internal one?
Yeah, it's and both. We have to go hard in the paint in dealing with the white myth of Black inferiority. That's an internal battle. But we also have to go hard in the paint in dealing with our external enemies, the whole Western power system that attacks us on every level, every single day of our lives. So it's an internal and an external struggle that we have to engage in 24/7, 365. We have to be vigilant about it. Just like David was always looking to find new ways to serve the people of God and to restore them to a place of dignity in the world. That's our struggle as African people everywhere in the world.
And it seems like this idea of serving God or serving the people of God, it seems so outside of what our spiritual orientation is these days, I think. How do the programs of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church prepare us for that internal and external battle, or prepare us to go hard in the paint and continue to work as illustrated in the examples you provide with Mary McLeod Bethune, Ida B. Wells, and Marcus Garvey?
Well, the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church starts with the premise that before we can change the world, we have to change our minds. We have to change the way we think about ourselves. And the examples I gave, this is August. We celebrate our patron saint, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Marcus Garvey had seeds planted in him as a child, right? That taught him who he was. His parents were Maroons. And so he never had any sense that I'm less than any other human being, because the seed of self-love was implanted in his heart as a kid. And that seed began to manifest and grow by the people that he grew up around, who also encouraged and molded and shaped him. The same thing was true of Mary McLeod Bethune. And the reason why I mentioned her is because she was a Pan-Africanist, even though history doesn't remember her that way, right? And so the seed that was planted in her as a child was that you are great, and your ability to accomplish and achieve is great because you are a part of a rich heritage and legacy as an African woman, right? She grew up in South Carolina. If you know anything about South Carolina, you know that was the most populous state for Black people in America for many, many decades. But it was also the place where African people who were brought to America were able to hold on to more of our identity and culture as African people. Hence, you had these groups of people like the Gullah people who were able to celebrate their identity and to maintain it without being whitewashed or brainwashed through Christianity and all the other ways that we were conditioned to hate ourselves. So Mary McLeod Bethune was a product of that. And so because of that, she was able to take up the mantle of Pan-Africanism, even without any direct tutelage, right? She went to a white missionary school to be trained, and they dissuaded her from going to do missionary work in Africa, but that was what was planted in her heart. But she was also passionate about helping Black girls to know who they were and to give them the right values to prosper and grow. So she was a Pan-Africanist, but she was also a woman's what's the word I'm looking for? A woman supporter, right? Back in the day, before there was any women's rights or even the women's rights movement, she was there already trying to uplift women, and not just women in her community, but women in general. That's how she ended up in service to the president during her time, because her work far outgrew her community, took her all over the country and all over the world.
Well, we're out of time. I'd like to thank you for a powerful sermon and an equally insightful conversation today. Are there any closing comments you'd like to leave with our viewers?
Let's continue to celebrate the legacy of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey and all of those Pan-Africanists who were impacted. And I mentioned this at the end of the sermon, that Garvey touched so many people's lives that the consequences, the reverberation of his spirit and energy and power is still with us today, shaping and molding Black organizations, groups, movements. Everything that's come out of the last 60, 70 years has been influenced by Marcus Mosiah Garvey in one way, shape, form, or fashion. So we need to continue to lift up those who have lifted us up.
Thank you so much. And we'd like to thank the viewers for checking us out today. We invite you to join us again next week for our next sermon and our weekly AfterWords discussion. God bless you and have peace.
What time is it? It's nation time.